When it comes to car design, unquestionably, the halcyon days of General Motors and its car design were really the mid-1960s. At the top of the General Motors design game for the 1960s was the trio of E-body cars, the 1966 Toronado, the 1966 Riviera, and the 1967 Eldorado. Now, the Toronado and the Eldorado would be front-wheel drive, and the Riviera would maintain its rear-wheel drive and kind of traditional nature, despite the fact that all three shared the same platform. Now, I say that they shared the same platform, but admittedly, the Riviera had a completely different X-frame that was a full-length X-frame, whereas the Toronado and Eldorado had kind of a three-quarter length frame and then this single-leaf rear suspension that really didn't endow the car with a great ride. That being said, the Toronado is really an iconic car for a number of reasons, but most prevalently, its styling with these very thin blade-like forms up front, the hidden headlamps with the eyebrows, at least for the 1966 model year, and then the distinctive huge wheel arches and that crease that runs the entire length of the car, starting at the front, hopping over the wheel, going down the side, hopping over the rear wheel, and then terminating at the end of the vehicle. That would be something that was often copied, but never done nearly as well as the Toronado. And what we're going to talk about today is an Oldsmobile proposal and some pictures for the so-called Oldsmobile Sidewinder. Now, what in the world was the Sidewinder, you say? Well, the Sidewinder was one of the names for the Toronado before it became the Toronado. So let's take a look at some of the design proposals for the Sidewinder. And here we have a clay model of the Oldsmobile Sidewinder in the Oldsmobile studio. Notice that quite a few things that would make it through to the final Toronado are present here, but there are some distinctive differences. Those big blade-like fenders up front are still present, although it's not quite clear how the bumper is integrated into the front end. But regardless, the electric shaver-like headlamp lenses are something that never made it through to production, and here you don't see the cross-car kind of linear grille either. But you do have the barbell theme or the dog bone theme with the outer edges that are wider than the midsection of the vehicle. And you also have the Oldsmobile block lettering that's spelled out there on the front, kind of similar to what would end up on the 1966 Toronado, but also a little different. There is no rocket logo on this particular Oldsmobile. And you also have, I would say, the windshield and the A-pillars that look very similar to how they did on the final vehicle. I do find it interesting that they have really nicely integrated the front license plate mounting here on this vehicle, something that wasn't often done on cars of the era. And here you have a sketch of the front and back of the vehicle that you just saw. Notice those kind of twin ports up front and the electric razor style hidden headlamp as well as cornering lamp. That was something that never really made it onto the final Toronado, this symmetrical headlamp and then lower area. It was something, though, that would make it onto some Oldsmobiles, like the rear of the 1967 Oldsmobile Delta 88 custom cars that had the tail lamps reflected in the bumper. So this was a theme that Oldsmobile was kind of toying with during the time. Also notice the rear end, this chopped off rear end and quad outlet exhaust. Of course, the 1966 Toronado would not get quad outlet exhaust. My guess is that it just cost too much and they went with the outlet on either side, the single outlet on either side for dual exhausts. And here we have the rear of the clay proposal that you saw before. It looks very similar to the final Toronado proposal, but notice the badging there on the passenger side. It says Sidewinder. Ooh. Now, the interesting thing, aside from the Sidewinder name here, is where is the tail lamp treatment for this car? I have to think that the rear end graphics, like the tail lamp, are embedded into that shape within a shape rear end. That was something that Oldsmobile was also during this time frame. If you look at the front end of the 1962 Oldsmobile, it has that so-called shape within a shape front, and here you have the same. Another way to get some interesting dimension to either the front or rear of the car, but my guess is the tail lamp was supposed to be kind of in that section in between the shape within a shape, if you will. And perhaps it was supposed to be something that ran across the entire vehicle. Now, you also notice that the rocket logo is not present on the rear. You have kind of a rectangle, and then it has a cross in the middle, and one, I'll say the horizontal axis of the cross extends let's just say well outside of itself. So this was a logo that never made it onto Oldsmobiles, and I'm not quite sure why designers didn't want to use the rocket logo on this that ended up on the car by this point. But perhaps that was just part of the Sidewinder's charm, and maybe Sidewinder, that logo helped because the horizontal axis of the logo was, well, long. So it's a Sidewinder. But regardless of the fact that this particular rear end didn't make it to production, you can see that a lot of elements did. The backlight is very similar to the roof line, as well as the continuous unbroken line from the roof all the way to the rear and the blunt rear end. That was something that would make it through to production, although this exact treatment of the tail lamps and the back panel was something that would obviously change. You can also see the pronounced wheel arches on either side of the car. That clearly would be something that would be a Toronado hallmark and would make it through to production. Now, another model during this time frame kind of more approximates the final variant of the Toronado. And there is a major difference, though, and that is that this particular proposal has 3 headlamps as opposed to the 2 round bulbs that were employed on the 1966 Toronado. But a lot looks similar here. There is an Oldsmobile script badging on the driver's side underneath the headlamps and above the turn signals. That would not make it through to production because there would be Oldsmobile lettering that would surround the rocket logo in the front area there of the header panel, the front and center area of the header panel. But otherwise, this is pretty close to the final front end of the car, although I'm not quite sure that this was still called the Sidewinder by this point. And lastly, I thought I would show one more proposal for the 1966 Toronado. This one is on GM's design patio. You'll notice that it still is devoid of the block lettering around the rocket logo, still has the script Oldsmobile on the driver's side kind of integrated into the grille. You have those eyebrows above the headlamps, and you definitely have one thing here that never made it through to production, aside from a door cut that was quite pronounced like that, although the one on the final car was somewhat pronounced. The main thing that never made it through to production are the wire wheels that you see here. For whatever reason, General Motors design vice president Bill Mitchell just loved wire wheels, and I suspect part of that was because you had cars like the E-Type Jag rolling around with wire wheels, and it just looked cool at the time. So that was something that certainly caught on and caught the eye of Bill Mitchell, and I suspect the designers were kind of playing to his desire to have wire wheels on a lot of different cars at that point. And I have to say, I like the final wheel design better, the one that kind of emulates the Cord a little bit, the Cord 810 as an example. I think it looks better than having this particular type of wheel. Now, in closing, I thought I would show this proposal here, this sad little proposal that bears so many different elements of the Toronado, from that, let's say, those pronounced wheel arches and that crease that runs the entire length of the body and hops over the wheels, to the unbroken line from the roof all the way back to the rear, the chopped off rear as well, with kind of the scalloped out section. Gosh, it looks a lot like a Toronado, although a sad one and an ill-proportioned one. But this was actually a proposal that was done in Virgil Exner's studio at Chrysler. And it came out allegedly in the early 1960s, so years before the Toronado was even being developed. It's not quite clear if there was a designer that came from Chrysler and brought this over, or if it just so happened that designers had to have or had a similar thought at kind of a similar time. Notice even that the Exner proposal does have some, I'll call it a little bit Cordish-like wheels on here. I'm not quite sure what the history is of this particular Exner proposal, but it is attributed to him and his design team, and certainly has more than a passing resemblance to the Toronado. So what do you think of the Sidewinder? Should Oldsmobile have changed its name on the Toronado or come out with the Sidewinder instead? By the way, the Toronado, for those who don't know, was a name that was used on a Chevrolet concept car a few years prior to the 1966 Toronado. It wasn't that great of a concept car, but the name was great, and they just decided to recycle it and put it on an Oldsmobile instead of a Chevrolet. But what do you think? Put a comment in the comment section and be sure to let me know. Thanks again for watching.